Hi everyone, I'm Matt, aka Railroad Street. Today I'm at Lock Quarry Metropark in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. This 73-acre site was once a powerhouse in Ohio's quarrying industry, producing some of the country's finest sandstone products. With its direct connections to the Ohio and Erie Canal and Cleveland Terminal and Valley Railroad, it's easy to see why it remained in operation for nearly a century. In this episode, we'll deep dive into its history and touch on topics like where it got its name from, its railroad spurs, and its relationship to the Quaker Oats Company. Let's go check it out. Lock Quarry is one of my favorite places in the valley, as it's a perfect blend of trains, history, and nature. The trails have an impressive amount of quarrying artifacts and signage with brief history synopses. Of course, me being a history fanatic, I always love to learn as much as I can about a topic. One of the best resources for Cuyahoga Valley history is just a stone's throws away, no pun intended, at the Peninsula Library and Historical Society. Its director, Randy Bergdorf, has spent decades researching the quarries and adding period photographs to the library's collection.
In about 1824, Herman Bronson got word that the canal was going to go through his lands here in the area. And so he moved to the community and discovered there was an outcropping of sandstone on part of his acreage. So he signed a contract to harvest stone from there.
The very first people to work here was the state of Ohio. So they were working to cut stone to build locks for the Ohio and Erie Canal that opened in the late 1820s. After that, the stone was made into all sorts of things because the deeper you get on this stone face, you get a lot more homogeneous, a lot higher quality stone, and it was made into all sorts of other products.
This 6.68-acre site eventually became known as the State Quarry, and later, Ohio and Erie Canal engineer Richard Howe purchased it. Even today, over 200 years later, you can still see remains of this original quarry while hiking through the park. After the opening of the Ohio and Erie Canal between Akron and Cleveland in 1827, word began spreading about the high-quality white sandstone found at the State Quarry. Originally known locally as Peninsula Sandstone, Ohio geologist J.S. Newberry officially coined this type of stone as Berea grit, or Berea sandstone, in 1874.
So the Berea sandstone gets its name from first being kind of discovered and quarried up in Berea, Ohio, and it turns out that this is all one contiguous bit of sandstone, one major rock formation left over from when Ohio was part of an inland sea and all this sand got deposited. And Berea sandstone is really, really great for building because it's got just the right grain. It's fine enough to be, sort of smooth, but gritty enough to still be good for all of those things like grinding stones, pulp stones, and so forth. And it's really homogeneous. If you look at the stone, it's very consistent throughout. You don't have, lines of impurities and so forth. If you go to places like Virginia Kendall and the Gorge Metropark, you've got the Sharon conglomerate, which is another sandstone, but it's full of pebbles and inconsistencies. So the Berea sandstone is by far and away high quality stuff.
During its heyday, there were 3 different quarrying sites in the Metropark. In 1844, Peninsula resident Lawson Waterman opened the North Quarry on his property north of the State Quarry. In 1855, Frederick Wood and Edmund Cole of the Wood, Coal and Company bought and established the South Quarry, also known as Lock Quarry. The quarry is named after the Canal's Lock 28, located roughly 75 feet below the bank that the quarry sits on. It was the deepest lock along the canal, raising or lowering boats by 17 feet. For most of the 19th century, stone quarried here was almost exclusively shipped by the Canal. The entire process of removing the rock and getting it to Lock 28 was time-consuming and dangerous.
It was back-breaking labor. Once they identified an area that would be likely a good spot to harvest the stone, then it was just the workers cutting down trees, digging up stumps. They always had a pile for all of that they called it the overburden. And there was a big pile of that where all that stuff got hauled to. It was a lot of hard work. I can't imagine how hard it was doing a lot of that by hand.
Once you've got all that gone and you have exposed stone, they would hand drill single holes in a line, like perforating a piece of paper, and drop charges into those holes, run away, and blast that stone open. So you ended up with kind of a group of 3 men, so you take turns. One would be seated on a padded stool, holding a stake, basically, that was square. You had 2 people with sledgehammers, so they'd hit, and you do a little rotation, so you end up creating kind of a round hole with a square peg, if you will. And rinse, repeat, did that a whole bunch of times until you had your line, blasted it, and start over.
Then came along the steam engine. Starting in 1863, the quarrying industry adopted game-changing steam-powered machines and tools.
So you took that group of 3 men that were working together by hand and consolidated that to a single person who could use a machine-powered jackhammer, basically. So there's this big machine that he'd stand up on, and boy, did you take a beating standing on that machine and getting shaken. But that would do the same thing. Bore a single hole, move along, make several until you could blast that stone. And then further along, the most advanced machine was called a channeling machine. So it was run on a little track with wheels along with a mobile boiler that would produce the steam for it. And that channeling machine could cut a 3-inch channel all at one time, so you get a nice flat face on the stone. The stone quarried here, like we said, it's really high quality, so it got made into all sorts of different things. You had pulp stones for grinding wood down into paper. You had grindstones for sharpening and working on various tools. You had mill stones for like oatmeal, cereal products, things like that. And then flagstones for creating paths and sidewalks. And then finally, riprap. So even the stuff that was kind of inconsistent, had cracks or whatnot, that could be sent and used for breakwaters and seawalls, and some of that got shipped straight up the canal to Cleveland and can be part of the breakwater up there on Lake Erie.
Steam not only revolutionized quarrymen's tools, but also brought forth a more efficient method of transporting the stone rather than by wagon.
They would use the derricks to put it into a wagon, and then the wagon could either take it wherever it needed to go locally, if that was the case, or they could take it down and put it in a canal boat. After the Valley Railway opened in 1880, then they were able to take it by Valley Railway. And actually in Deep Lock, the railroad built a siding up into the quarry so that they could actually drive the big locomotives right into the quarry and load up that way. Again, that's still a very dangerous, loud, hard job. There's a lot of them in the quarries that were like that.
In 1890, the South Quarry put into service a Climax steam engine, dubbed by quarry workers as the Dinky.
The main purpose of the Dinky was, in a lot of the quarrying operations, they had what was called track that could be easily relocated. It was movable track. And so they would lay that on the floor of the quarry, and then the Dinky would take the stone short distances until it maybe could be taken to the railroad siding and then put on the locomotive. That was another loud piece of equipment in the quarry. There was a lot of loud in the quarry, a lot of loud things. The very first day that the Dinky that we just talked about was put into operation, a locomotive backed into one of the guy wires for the hoists. It fell and killed 2 individuals in the quarry. They conducted an inquiry to determine the cause. I think it came down to inadequate communication, but and the fact that everybody was kind of excited about the dinky, and I think people weren't paying attention. And there were no worker safety laws back then.
Over the course of all 3 quarries' operations, their ownerships or leases changed hands many times. Eventually in 1896, all of them ended up under the umbrella of the Cleveland Stone Company, who had quarries in Amherst, Berea, and Columbia. One of the most prominent previous owners of the South Quarry was Akron businessman Ferdinand Schumacher.
He started what we know today as Quaker Oats down in Akron, and so having this quarry made a lot of sense for him because he had a lot of millstones being shipped constantly straight from here along the canal and up to his cereal works company for grinding oatmeal and other cereal products.
In 1900, a new quarrying site, isolated northwest of the other 3, opened up. Known as the Independent Quarry, it required the Cleveland Terminal and Valley Railroad to extend its quarry branch line to it in 1906. However, quarrying here didn't last nearly as long as the other quarries. The Amherst Quarries Company acquired the Independent Quarry, but it went bankrupt by 1910 and was forced to liquidate. After being purchased by the Cleveland Stone Company, quarrying at all 4 quarries slowly dwindled until ending in 1917.
Quarrying ultimately ended here because of a change in markets. Concrete was just becoming a lot more popular, a lot more accessible, and if you wanted a path that made curves or was in crazy shapes, it was a lot easier to make that out of concrete than having to hand hew everything to your specification. So the state quarry ended first because, the canal closed down. They were finished in the early 1900s, and then the Cleveland Stone Company ended a little bit after that. Again, change in the market and then consolidating their operations to their big quarries up in Amherst.
We have in our archives here a log book that the Cleveland Stone Company used to process the stone that would be shipped out of there. They would enter an order for, 15 5 feet by 8 foot by whatever size stone, and they would keep track of it. The last entry in that book is 1917. And that last entry is a notation about dismantling the derricks and everything and sending them on to another quarry.
Although quarrying had ended, the ruins of the quarries sat abandoned for decades as nature reclaimed it. In 1934, the Cleveland Stone Company gave the land that the 3 quarries were on to the Akron Metropolitan Park District, precursor of the Summit Metroparks.
So the Cleveland Stone Company gave this property to us for $1, and then the state, a little while after that, gave us the rest of the property. And it kind of sat for almost 30 years before it became an official metro park. In the interim, in the 1930s, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, was really active. We had 2 camps, one at Sand Run, one at Virginia Kendall, and they were working during that Depression time to build up our parks, whether that be reforesting areas, but also a lot of building of buildings. So the stone from Deep Lock Quarry here can be seen at Furnace Run Lodge. That's probably the best example, as well as a lot of the other buildings around the Virginia Kendall area. So they were able to utilize stone that was kind of still here on site and learn quarrying methods and cut and use all those things and then take them to other projects. Actually, behind where we're standing, there's a big pile of stone over there. That was one of the last projects the CCC did here. They carved a bunch of stones to act as a pair of wing walls to hold back the banks through this tunnel over at Virginia Kendall Lake. And for whatever reason, they never got transported. So there's sort of railroad ties there now instead of the rocks. So they're just sitting here stacked all pretty just for us to go by and have a little, mystery.
When you visit Deep Lock Quarry Metropark, the first thing you're greeted with is this now iconic entrance sign.
So our first naturalist, his name was Bert Szabo. he wanted to come up with a portal sign that was going to catch your attention and also call back to the history of this place. So he started out with a really small little desk-sized model of how he wanted that to look. We were able to acquire a grindstone, which weighs about 1,500 pounds, turn it on its side so it's nice and prominent, and they poured a concrete foundation and set it in, and it's been there ever since the 60s. The biggest, most prominent thing you can see is the quarry face here behind us. So the trail leads you right up to this site, and if you continue along the trail, it circles up to the top of the quarry, which is pretty neat. My favorite time to come down here is like winter or any time where there's not leaves on the trees, because you can look around the corner there and see just how much stone was removed here. And on your way to the quarry from the parking lot, we have several signs along the way that kind of point out things that have been discarded or left behind on the sides of the trail. So there's some old grindstones, some pieces that would probably be used more for riprap that have some inconsistencies and bits of iron running through them. And then there are a few derrick bases. So those were these giant cranes that could be cranked by hand or by horse to pick up and move stone from place to place. So the foundations of those are around.
If you also hike the Ohio and Erie Canal towpath, you can visit the park's namesake, Lock 28. Don't let the aged look of its walls fool you. It's actually concrete faced over the original sandstone when several of the canal's locks were rehabbed in 1907. There are still areas where you can see the original Berea sandstone blocks. The other quarry west of Deep Lock that I mentioned earlier was turned into a swimming hole in 1955. However, at the time of recording this video, it was just announced that it's been permanently closed. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Railroad Street for more content just like this. Thanks for watching, everyone.